Welcome to the Villanova University Center for Irish Studies podcast. My name is Joseph Lennon, and I am the Emily C. Riley Director of the Center and host of this podcast series. Villanova's connections to Ireland extend back to its founding and continue to this day. We offer a major and a minor in Irish Studies and have 6 study abroad programs to Ireland. We teach in 8 disciplines and host distinguished visitors to campus. This podcast aims to share some of our conversations and expand the bounds of our community beyond campus. Thank you, and feel free to share. So hi, everyone. You're very welcome here. This is Joseph Lennon. I'm here talking with Bebe Ashley, Mícheál McCann, and Derry McWade, who are joining us this week from the Seamus Heaney Center at Queen's University, Belfast. I'm going to ask each of them to read a little bit of their creative work and ask a few questions. They're all gathered in Belfast, but they're from different places in the UK and Ireland, and we can get into that in a little bit. But in 2021, Bebe Ashley was awarded a Chair of Ireland Poetry Trust Award. Previously, Bebe has been shortlisted in the Bridport Prize and for the National Poetry Competition. In 2023, Bebe won the Ivan Juritz Prize for Creative Experiment for Text. Recently, Bebe represented Northern Ireland in the British Council Literature Seminar in Berlin and was selected by the Arts Council of Northern Ireland and Future Screens NI as one of 9 artists to receive a Digital Evolution Award in support of a project, Confetti, that explores the poetic potential of Braille and 3D printing. She was awarded a Creative Practitioner Bursary by Belfast City Council. Her 3D printed poems are in exhibition at the Museum of Literature Ireland in Dublin. And Bebe's first collection, Gold Light Shining, was published by Banshee Press in 2020. Her second collection will be published in 2025. Mícheál McCann is a poet and editor from Derry, based in Belfast. He was born in Derry City and has published poems in Poetry Review, Poetry Ireland Review, The Stinging Fly, Queering the Green, Ciphers, Romance Options, Love Poems for Today, and the Manchester Review. He has published 3 chapbooks of poetry, and his first collection of poems, Devotion, is forthcoming from the very esteemed Gallery Press in May 2024. And Derry McWade is a writer and PhD student at the Seamus Heaney Center at Queen's University, Belfast. He writes fiction, scripts, and edits the Apiary, Queen's literary magazine. His work can be found on BBC Storytellers radio program and the new animated short film To Break a Circle, directed by Kalia
Firester.
Thank you, Kalia Firester, premiering this year. He is currently working on a novel called Tiger Cubs. You were saying tiger cubs as in?
Celtic tiger.
As in the Celtic tiger.
Tiger.
So growing up post what? Post 2008? I mean,
they were born in a boom and they came of age in a bust.
Right. So today we're going to talk. Everyone here besides me is under 30, so it's very intimidating for an old codger like myself. But I thought we could start maybe with everybody giving a little bit of a reading and maybe just saying where you grew up. Because I think it's interesting for our audience to hear.
Sure, I'll start. So I grew up in Bedfordshire, England, and I moved to Belfast about 7-8 years ago, and now I live in Colinchie, County Down, right near the loch, and I absolutely love it. I have been at Queen's for almost as long as I've been, for exactly the amount of time I've been in Northern Ireland. And have worked kind of all across the island now. My publishers are based in the south, but I'm going to Galway for the first time next week. So it's taken me kind of 7-8 years to start exploring. But I have brought today my 2 most Irish poems, I would say. So the first of these was commissioned by Poetry's Commemoration, a massive island-wide project with the Decade of Centenary project that kind of has been going out for the last year or so. And for that, we had to go to archives and look for primary sources. And I was looking at the Irish Book Lover, because I feel like I'm an Irish book lover of 2023, 2024. So I kind of wanted to know what it felt like to be an Irish book lover of that time. So this poem is called The Lookout, and the epigraph is taken from the Saturday Review in the Irish Book Lover, Volume 12. The Lookout. It is probable that poetry is being born somewhere in the stillness of the night when the Republican soldier looks up at the stars or hears the rabbit rustle in the fern. The scraps of paper shoved down the inside ankle of a boot are there for emergencies. It's easy to forget yourself when the hills come and go with the cloud cover and the heartbreak has been relentless. By now, even you are suspicious of the rabbit rustling through the fern and of the hedgehog emerging from the heliotrope. A night with no stars is not a good night. You are wearing down the lead of the pencil in your coat pocket. The paper dampens quickly, and being no distance from the lock will help. If you look north long enough, you'll see sparks from somebody else's safety matches reflected in the gorse, and you'll appreciate the risk. A brisk wind would carry fire across the island.
It's gorgeous.
Thank you. And my second poem is one of my absolute favourites, and it was written at the Ulster Museum. At the Seamus Heaney Centre, we have an Ekphrasis project that we run annually. And this year we went to the Lavery exhibition, which was fantastic, and Colin Middleton as well.
So you might want to just say for 1 second what Ekphrasis
Oh,
for
sorry.
everybody.
Yeah. So Ekphrasis is kind of poetry that responds traditionally to visual art, but now I personally believe art can be any form. So Stephen Sexton's book, what I would believe to be a form of ekphrasis inspired by Super Mario. My book, inspired by Harry Styles' Torsuits, I would also view that as kind of ekphrastic. But in the most traditional form, this is responding to a painting at the Ulster Museum. And it's called Writing Audio Description at the Ulster Museum. I want to talk you through the time and space of early California. The brushstrokes are confident in the white space of sea foam. The colours are cold, and I am sure the seawall is seeping. I am happy in the landscapes I've never seen in person. It does not matter that this is a windowless room. Venice Beach is lit well, and I wouldn't want to change my view. The pigment of the watercolour is easily saturated in the paper. I'm trying to list the most important blues when I am distracted by something new, a close but different blue.
A close but different blue. I love it.
Thank you.
So, Mícheál, can you read us? So that everyone, that was Bebe Ashley, and we will now hear a couple of poems from Mícheál McCann.
Thanks. I'll read 2 poems. My name is Mícheál, and I am from Derry City. I was raised just on the border of Derry and Donegal, and sort of the northernmost tip of the city, and it's a wonderful place. And a lot of writers who leave Derry are sort of occupied by it, as I am. The first poem I'll read is called Keeper. It's about my father, and it imagines him watching me feel very alienated amongst boys my age, and that he maybe had an awareness of my difference from them before I did. It's a poem about forgiveness, really. Keeper. To my memory, I was always on a Gaelic pitch in autumn, the trees low and big brown mounds of leaves, a spectrum of brown thrown in the air by balls skimming the tops like a scalping razor. Relegated to the goalposts, those strong legs of the better team, I watch, amazed, as they run, roll and weave as brave as otters, an owl watching them play. With my end of the pitch often vacant and shoutless, I would busy myself with the gravel stones beneath me, articulating them lovingly into stone palaces around the posts. I wanted to inhabit each one and feel at home. My father leans on the sideline without a cap, the autumn chill not so unmanageable yet, his bald head like the scored ground under a wooden swing where wildflowers have a chance. He begins to yell, Mícheál, Mícheál, and not in disappointment or embarrassment, as I thought immediately, but to pull me from reverie as the leather ball whirled towards my cheek. The rasp in his voice not due to my softness, I learned years later. No, it was how he lay witness to a great pain careening towards me through the cold air and could not catch it. I often write poems quite slowly, but I've been working on the single one book that's coming out in a couple of weeks for a long time, and I'm feeling the sort of very welcome new poems springing out. So actually, I've really loved being on campus, and I've been thinking about the word arboretum for a couple of months, and then I found myself in an arboretum on campus, so I wrote this. Villanova Arboretum. March. Bare and brittle, but each morning I seek their company in the early hours. As a child, I never imagined I would be someone who would visit graveyards. Bare branches extend into the air above without caution, not trembling, acting instead beyond my knot-tying gestures as I walk under them. I appreciate their persistence. St. Augustine, cast ironically in white, watches over the comings and goings through the arboretum. I cannot bear to see things fully, entirely. Augustine looks on. An Augustinian friar travelled the world, shaving little aspects of trees, dropping them lonely into a scratchy breast pocket. The quality of mercy. He preserved the parent tree and carried these cuttings to this place, knowing he would not see their fullness. I look around for solitude these days when I am not near you. I sit in the tinnitus hum of St. Thomas's or the toilet at the cocktail reception and wonder what you're doing just now, sitting with a victorious cat on knee, fighting with a crease in a shirt for work. Your autumn eyes are clear as March. I sit to write this at a table by a window, and sun pours over me like care. I delay finishing this poem, so to not look upon the empty wooden chair facing me.
That's lovely.
Thanks.
Oh. So we were on a tour yesterday of the campus, and we actually did not get to see the dawn sequoia, so I have to show it to you before you go, but it's from China, and it's a sequoia tree. It's enormous, like the beech we saw. That's lovely. Thank you. Thank you for writing, and thank you for sharing that. So Dara McQueen.
On to me. Not to bring the tone down a little bit with this next story, but this is the first few pages of my new story, Bark. The dog was her idea. A black mix of Labrador and Rottweiler, still runty after 3 months. She called it a Labroddy. He called it dog. Why shouldn't a thing be called what it is? He said to her. His wife did not respond to that. His wife often did not respond to him. What she was hiding, he couldn't be sure, but there was something he didn't know. Not much got past him. She came home with the dog on a Wednesday evening. A cousin of hers needed rid of an unexpected litter, her pedigree Labrador bearing 5 puppies. His wife left work an hour early to go and get one. She hadn't discussed this with him. It was ugly. He said that right away to get the elephant out of the room. He looked up the breed later on. Most turn out gorgeous. This one had a scrunched up nose, wiry frame, hair combed along its side. His wife had picked the wrong puppy. Its eyes followed him around the room, pleading at him in unbroken brown. Not human eyes at all. He wouldn't take pity on a thing like that. It started in small ways, a month after it arrived in the home, leaving the dog out in the rain, though it seemed almost happy out there, jumping in and out of the puddles, fur glistening in the soft lights of the kitchen, reveling in the wet. This made him resent it even more so. He turned off the lights and left it there, unseen, an empty space in the dark. His wife heard it whining before midnight. He was watching her from the bed as she got ready, putting on the nightdress that ended just before her pale ankles, avoiding his gaze. She ignored the yapping for a minute, but when the dog howled, she left to let it back in. She was gone for 5 minutes. He followed her footsteps back along the corridor. When she was outside the bedroom, he reached out and turned off his bedside light. He heard the soft click of the closed door. His wife slipped into bed so smoothly, the springs in their mattress didn't groan. They didn't make any noise at all. He wanted to reach out and touch her. The quiet held until the next morning, interrupted by her old car coughing up outside the house. He went to the kitchen. The dog was waiting by the door, its head tilted sideways up at him. He didn't want to meet its eye. He picked up its full water bowl and emptied it into the electric kettle. The boiling nose rose in a whistle. The dog slunk up to the man's bare feet, licking the lightly flaking skin between his toes. He shooed it away with his foot, gripping the dog lightly on the side of the leg. It slipped away in circles, jumping onto the sofa. "Get down from there," he said to it, his voice not quite a shout. The dog stared back up at him in defiance. The man stomped his bare left foot onto the ground. It went to the floor. The man made his cup of tea and stood at the kitchen counter, drinking it. The dog pleated up at him from the floor beside the sofa. The tea tasted well. Those big eyes will not work on him. He got it. He hoped the dog got this message. Thank you.
Wow.
Yeah, real tone.
No, it's
that one.
lovely. It's really lovely. I mean, how many times have you been married?
Too many to count.
Yeah. No, it's, I mean, to bring us into these worlds so magnificently. I want to just first start, also, can you say where you grew up?
Yeah, I grew up in Dublin, so I'm not from Belfast, but my dad's from Belfast, so that's...
So where in Dublin?
South Dublin, so Sandymount, if you know it.
Sandymount's beautiful.
Oh yeah, as Joyce wrote about it.
That's right. Stephen walks out there, Sandymount
Yes, he
Strand,
does,
right? Stephen Dedalus. So my first question is just to say, in all of your, just in hearing what you write, I mean, the light glistening in the firs, the autumn eyes, the trees, the fur glistening in the rain and the light. How do you think about representing the real world in terms of these sensual details? Because you're all doing it, and you're doing it beautifully, and I'm just to bring us in away from the digital into the actual. I mean, do you think about things this way? Do you think about, I want to capture these details? How do you?
It's psychological for me. It's like, I think to get closer to psychological experience, it's that sort of, that's what lingers in the memory, you know, like how the light shone through the canopy of trees when X is happening, or I suppose cinematic would be a way you could call it, but to me it's evoking the sensorial quality of memory. So that seems closer to psychology than, so it seems important to try and make that sort of the surface of the poem, in my case, sort of slightly moving.
Yeah.
That's my sort of sense of it.
Right. And you're playing with the light. And Bebe, you as well.
Yeah, I wonder if it's because sometimes it feels like there is so little light, which sounds like such a kind of dreary thing to say. But I was really taken, while we've been here, by how much bright blue sky there is and how much of the sky you can see on the campus. There's, not very many really tall buildings. And kind of the same in Belfast, when the cloud has come in off the hills and into the valley, sometimes, because I drive in over, so sometimes you can't see above the cloud cover once you're down in the city.
Right.
So the days where surprisingly there's kind of almost this like extra bit of sun, or you actually feel the warmth of it, I feel like it kind of evokes this consciousness of place and like being alive in that exact moment, and it kind of almost like lodges it as a memory. But I think too, maybe it's kind of, we're surrounded by so much water, so it's very hard not to be like connected to the landscape. So the kind of
to the water.
The desire to kind of acknowledge the trees and see how everything kind of works together as one, like is important, I think.
No, it does strike me that it has this. I mean, in the poems that you read, has an awareness of sustainability. I mean, what we would think about as sustainability in terms of nature being a part of our lives and us being a part of its life, as opposed to something potted. But also maybe in Ireland, I've always thought that, and the UK, with the sun coming and the clouds going, when we get a gray day here in Philadelphia, it could be gray all day with no change, no clouds, no formation. But in Ireland, it seems to be changing so much. Not to just talk about the weather, but do you have a sense of that?
We're experts at talking about that.
I know, it's like,
Favorite thing to do is talk about the weather.
It's so densely dynamic, though. You know, there's a saying, that if it starts to rain in Belfast, it's only going to rain for 15 minutes and it stops. You know, the weather is so moving. Well, obviously, but it could be raining and then it could be grey and then the sun flicks out and then, it is,
So let's also talk about, Bebe, maybe you could talk a bit about, you handed me this wonderful piece of recycled plastic that has between my finger and my thumb written in Braille. And it's beautiful. It's this kind of aquamarine color. Can you tell us what inspired you to 3D print this?
So 3D printing Braille really kind of began in the pandemic, but it almost goes like a bit further back from that. So I'm always very interested in accessibility and arts accessibility in particular. So kind of a lot of my later poems and the poems in the next book are about kind of like language acquisition and how as writers we always take for granted the ability to read, that the majority of us do. Even kind of the signage, like walking into the recording studio or like the directions of the maps around campus. I feel like we're almost overloaded with language, and there is so little literature that is available in Braille. So in the pandemic, I switched from, my sign language classes were put on pause, so I switched from sign language to Braille, and I just sat there and pressed these 6 keys in different motions over and over and over. And with all the hand sanitizer, the paper kind of degrades a little bit. It's a more heavyweight paper, but with the amount of people that were kind of washing our hands, I just thought that, you know, if I drop this and stand on it, I have to re-braille it. If a cat walks over it, I have to re-braille it because it's going to put pressure and make it illegible. So I was looking for a more sustainable form, and I found a filament that is made from recycled medical waste trays out of a company in Amsterdam, and they have these beautiful transparent colours. So the one that you have is emerald, and my favourite is kind of honey and midsummer glow. If you hold it up again to the light, I feel like we're so obsessed with light, but if you hold it up to the sun, you can see all the layers. So I just fell in love with it. I really enjoy working in fragmentation, and it works really well for workshops and everything. So I've started, and now I almost can't stop with it.
They're really beautiful.
Thank you.
And so I think for the visually impaired or for someone that has partial vision, I mean, they're also, I mean, they're just striking. And I wonder about the experience of just picking up that bit of a poem, that fragment of a poem. We were talking about fairies earlier, Dara and I, and just about fairy stories and fragments. And you read a fragment today. I'm just going to go off the fragment theme here for a second. But you've given us this glimpse of a suburban, is it suburban or urban household? And what's in bringing this out, you get us deep into a couple's relationship very quickly. Where does, I don't want to say where does the story go, but is this in the beginning that you've given us, does the story unpack this psychologically? Does this become the drama that unfolds about the dog? And
so the sort of thrust of the story then is about this dog, which sort of becomes, I guess, the story itself is about violence and the violence that gets passed on and the violence that gets displaced sometimes. So a lot of the story is about like a violent man who takes out a lot of his displaced sort of anger onto a dog. And as the story goes on, that sort of shifts a little bit and becomes about the dog itself and the way in which the dog processes and responds, and then ultimately, not to give too much away, but to ultimately then passes on that violence itself as it sort of becomes to learn more. I say it, I very carefully sort of dehumanize the dog for the first half by calling it he is a he, the dog, but the man refuses to give the dog any sort of humanity and agency, and then that ends up defining the dog's humanity.
It sounds like counterparts, the Joyce, where the violence gets passed on and kicked down and kicked down. I mean, violence as a theme, it comes up also in your poem about growing up as a queer person in Derry, and it strikes me that line about the ball coming at you, and that, what was it's not inevitable violence, but I just made a note of it. I thought that's lovely. It's not lovely, but
it was how he lay witness pain, to a great pain careening towards me through the cold air.
Careening towards you.
Could not catch up.
So, how were you thinking about is the pain and as a violence as well, or just the pain of growing up in a sense where you feel different than the majority, or?
Yeah, I think the pain is sort of to me the pain is an uninteresting part of that poem to me. I think what I'm trying to mine is that to articulate that perhaps my father was cognizant
The
of something.
gentleness of your father is really
right.
moving.
And so I sort of, I sometimes think, I'm not trying to write a pity party poem about my personal pain, but I think it's what I'm trying to do in that poem is say that, I'm trying to imagine that someone was cognizant of a pain that I didn't think they were, which is, I guess, as close as you can get to forgiving someone for a difficult past, and I think being from the Northern Ireland, whatever, you're always interested in. I mean, forgiveness is a deeply, it's a passion project of mine, even like biblically and in novels and stuff. I mean, it's the most captivating of human impulses because it is non-human to be able to do it. It's grace, I suppose, and whatever,
Right.
So that was at the foreground of that. But it's funny. I mean, life's hard and full of pain. That's particularly interesting to me.
That's like Louis McNeat.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Whereas what's more interesting is how we circumnavigate and and survive that together.
Yeah.
I think that way in which the poem reframes those early childhood memories with fathers is what is so moving to me about it. I think it speaks to a little of my own experience being young, and I teared up when you read it there again. I love that poem.
And you've all gone through the pandemic and the isolation of the pandemic. How did that change? Did it change your art? Did it change your commitment? You're wanting to do this? Did it speed things up, slow things down?
It sped things up for me. It definitely provoked it. I was sort of just out of my undergrad when it happened. It was kind of a year out. I was figuring out what to do with my life a little bit. I was going to go teach English, I think, in different countries, but then the pandemic happened and I was stuck at home and I knew that something needed to change. So I moved to Belfast to do my master's in creative writing, and kind of became, I always loved writing, but it wasn't until that moment where I think it became the thing that I really wanted to do.
And do you think we'll see some kind of some fairy magic or some sort of magical realism coming into any of your stories?
Yeah, I think some of my work definitely has that element. Not anything that I'm working on at the moment, but I co-wrote a film with an animator, Callie Forster, as I mentioned at the start, which is sort of about fairy forts. I've written stories previously, sort of riffing on fairy myths, and it's something that really fascinates me and keeps me interested. So maybe I'll move on to that after the novel's done.
Yeah. Well, I'm fascinated by it as well. And Mícheál, your book is coming out with Gallery Press. That's pretty weighty.
Thank you. I'm very pleased about it.
Yeah, I bet you should be. It should be. With Peter Fallon there.
Well, I mean, that is... I mean, I'm thrilled about that. I'm sort of... My brain's still turning over your question, though. I think... Bebe and I have been in a long poetic correspondence for years and years, and one thing that's interesting is, I'll not speak for your poems, but I felt in the pandemic my visual landscape changed. I'm very interested in place in the outside and things, but what happened was I found that my poems were being situated inside looking out, where there was mediums through which I was looking, if it was glass or phone calls or things being apart from things, and I've noticed that in a lot of contemporary poems in the last sort of year and a half. It's like the interior, domestic portraits. I mean, I'm just my book is basically a book of love poems that are interior portraits, really. I think, but also there's an aspect, isn't there, not just a queer impulse, but importantly a queer impulse of having a space of your own, a strong lock, blinds, privacy, and so on. So anyway, so I'm really thrilled that Gallery were interested, and I mean, but of course, like they published, Pierce Hutchinson, in the 80s and 90s, who's prolific, openly gay poet. So it's not as I sometimes think. I'm not reinventing the wheel. It's just nice to be welcomed into that list.
Well, it's probably also the quality of the poems.
Thank you. It's nice of you to say.
And so, does this tie into? I mean, did you get interested in ekphrastic poems during COVID, or?
I think the pandemic is interesting because I think even now, I don't think we really have processed what it was. And at the time, for me, I had no family on the island at all. So I had a housemate, but I really was quite isolated, and it did seem to accelerate a lot of things. I had grew up in the countryside, so living in a city, even the fact there were very few cars driving around, I didn't particularly enjoy it. I couldn't stand the brick walls, they were so high. I could see so little of the sky. I could see this tiny blue square. And I think that's why I'm always obsessed with how much of the sky I can see now when I go to other places. So I don't think too that I would have been able to learn Braille at any other point of my life so far without having all those hours of nothing to do but sit there and code break and kind of like build it's a very kind of methodical language, so or it's a code of communication really, not a language, but it's very methodically built. So you kind of start with the first few letters and it builds on, and then the numbers are the same as the initial like first 9 letters but with a numerical indicator. So my housemate couldn't understand because I would just sit there all day with these massive binders of these lessons and work through them. But I don't think if I had the space to not do that, to just like float around, I would have been able to like stay where I was. But too, we'd just started PhD, right? Had we? Mm-hmm. Yes, within the first 6 months, all the libraries were closed. I didn't have an office chair at home. Trying to work on the kitchen table was quite challenging, and I switched to part-time as well because of that. So for me it kind of accelerated like a move out back to the country, and a lot of other things.
You also published a book in the pandemic.
Oh, I forgot. Yeah, so I also launched my book in the pandemic, which I was trying to make like kind of a debut and not having anyone know you, trying to like launch online. It was
That's strange.
Very strange.
Definitely.
But I also think, just kind of going back to pain a second ago, as someone who moved to Northern Ireland, I have been absolutely shocked. I knew nothing about, like I was raised in England and I did history at A-level, but not that there's anything taught about Northern Ireland to people in England. And I was shocked at how desensitised everyone is in Northern Ireland to violence. And I think there is this preoccupation with writing that comes from Northern Ireland about kind of assessing it for like pain, assessing it for violence, and seeing what, even in the most contemporary works now, and the ones that are kind of on the prize lists a lot and have a lot of recognition and shortlist, there is often this kind of focus or element on like suffering, and I think it's still very much the case, and generationally, you know, it's only one generation up, if that, that people are still suffering. But I think it is really interesting.
There's a different sense in Northern Ireland now than there was 30 years ago or 20 years ago. And are you suggesting that maybe that there's other things to write about besides pain?
No, not that there's other things to write about, but I think it kind of also goes back to the environment question. Like so much of the city of Belfast is constructed by who can live where and who can go down what streets. And as someone who has then chosen to stay in this place, to move to this place and stay there, you kind of learn where is accessible to you, and is it the sea, and is it the parks and the open spaces, or is it these streets with murals that you probably
might not, that might put you off.
Well,
I want to thank you all for being here and for meeting our students, and for we're having a reading tomorrow night at the Kelly House, so it's a very exciting time. But thank you, Bebe Ashley. I'm going to get everyone's name right. I'm just blanking. Mícheál McCann and Derry McWade. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much for hosting us. It's lovely.
Cheers.